On this edition of Early Look, I'm going to be previewing the new UFC Kansas City main event, Ian Garry, Carlos Prates, 5 rounds in the welterweight division. My name is James Lynch. This is Early Look. If you haven't watched the show before, I'm going to go through a bunch of different stats, a bunch of different intangibles. Then I'm going to give you my prediction for this fight at the end. Let me know in the comments which way you're going on this one. Let me get your prediction. I don't just want to pick. I want to hear how you think this fight plays out like we normally do. Let's do a quick tale of the tape between these two. Ian Garry, 15-1, 21-6 for Carlos Prates. 27 years old compared to 31, 6'3" to 6'1", 74.5 to 78. So see Ian Garry, younger, going to be a little bit bigger, except for the reach. That goes to Carlos Prates in this fight. Let's start with the future Ian Garry and take a look at everything that's going on with him. So I mentioned it there, 15-1 record. He's got 7 knockouts, 1 submission, and 7 decisions. He's currently ranked number 7 in the welterweight division. He's 27 years old, 6'3" with a 74-inch reach. So he's 4 years younger and will have a 2-inch height advantage in this fight. Trains at a shoot box. He's the former Cage Warriors welterweight champion. He's got performance of the night 1 time against Daniel Rodriguez. He was tied with Leon Edwards for the 3rd longest winning streak in welterweight division history. Garry made his amateur debut way back in November of 2017, made his pro debut a couple of years later in February of 2019, did not make his UFC debut until November of 2021. That was a first round finish over Jordan Williams. He is 8-1 in the UFC. He's got 3 stoppage victories. Some notable wins include Daniel Rodriguez, just because Rodriguez at one point was ranked, Neil Magny, and then Jeff Neal. So, and I guess we'll mention Michael Venom Page as well. He's been ranked and obviously a notable fighter coming over from Bellator. His only loss is his last fight, a very good performance against Shavkat Rakhmonov. We'll talk about that fight a little bit later. And then he's only had 1 injury that's kept him out of action. That was the Luque fight. He got, well, it wasn't an injury. He got sick in that fight. So that did not happen at UFC 296. Ends up fighting Jeff Neal a little bit later. He's only had 1 layoff in his UFC career. That was just going from Keenan Song to Daniel Rodriguez. Gabe Green to Keenan Song. My bad. There was a 245-day layoff in that fight. But outside of that, he's been pretty active, fighting at least a couple times a year. Last year alone, he fought 3 times. Will be making his first fight in 2025. And again, taking this on a bit of short notice, as we just found out, at the time of recording this, it is April 3rd. We just found out about this a couple days ago. So big fight going on there. Let's have that Shavkat fight. Again, Shavkat ended up getting the win, but Garry made it much closer than it needed to be. And I do want to point out that he was a plus 310 underdog in that fight. But if you go look at the striking stats in this one, just wanted to quickly mention this. Actually, I think I've got him up here with Ian Garry. Just 1 second. Should have had this up ahead of time. But if you look there, Ian Garry, as far as the striking stats on the Shavkat fight, it was pretty close. In fact, Ian Garry actually landed the more significant strikes, 42 of 84 compared to 37 of 67. So pretty close fight overall. I know Shavkat won. I don't think there's people who would score that fight for Ian Garry, but I do want to point that out because he was heavily a big underdog going into that fight. A lot of people felt like Shavkat was going to run right through him. And I know Shavkat had the MCL injury, but still, I think Garry, you got to give him some credit. He put up a very good fight in that one, ultimately losing his first career fight. Let's get back to Garry's stats, though. Overall, you look at their significant strikes landed per minute, 4.72. His striking accuracy is at 54%. His striking defense is at 51%, so he does get hit a little bit. We'll see if Prates is able to find the button in this one. His takedown average is 0.74, and his takedown accuracy is at 54%. His takedown defense is at 73%. Don't think we're going to see any takedowns in this one, although you never know. So yeah, that is pretty much everything you need to know about Ian Garry. Again, really interesting fight in the welterweight division here against Carlos Prates. Let's talk about his opponent, Carlos Prates, the Nightmare, obviously one of the newcomers in the UFC. Carlos Prates, 21-6. He's got 16 knockouts, 3 submissions, and 2 decisions. He's currently ranked number 13 in the welterweight division. He is 31 years old, 6'1" with a 78-inch reach, so he'll have a 3.5-inch reach advantage in this fight, but he will be the older fighter in this spot. We know he trains out of the Great Fighting Nerds gym. He's got performance of the night 4 times, so every single one of his UFC fights have been performance of the night. That's very impressive because he's got wins over Trevin Giles, Charles Radke, Li Jingliang, and Neil Magny. Did not have an amateur debut. Of course, Carlos Prates fought in Muay Thai as well. He's got some fights there, so and some kickboxing, as you can see here too. So no amateur debut, went straight to the pros in March of 2012, and then made his, this is kind of interesting, I didn't realize this. So he makes his UFC debut against Trevin Giles. That was February 10th, 2024. That was last February, so that's what I meant. He's kind of a new fighter in the UFC division. 1 week before, Ian Garry fought Jeff Neal. So the fight that Ian Garry had with Jeff Neal, that was a week after Carlos Prates made his UFC debut. So that's kind of interesting when looking at kind of their trajectories and all that, despite the fact that Garry is obviously younger in this spot. And Gary's also had, by the time that Carlos Prates made his UFC debut, Ian Garry already had 6 fights. I mentioned him being a very active fighter, so that's one thing to sort of consider when you're looking at this matchup. Prates is undefeated. He's 4-0. He's got 4 finishes. His only notable wins really are Li Jingliang, and I'll give him that because not only was Li a formerly ranked opponent in the welterweight division, that was also his first knockout loss. So that was a pretty impressive win there for Carlos Prates. And then his last fight, getting the quick win over Neil Magny, knocking out Magny in the very first round. So there's that too. So again, those are sort of the 2 notable wins. And obviously with him being 4-0, he doesn't have any notable losses in the weight class either. He's also hasn't had any layoffs, and he hasn't had any close fights because, he's been finishing all of his opponents here. Let's go look at his stats though. Pretty impressive. It's actually interesting. His striking stats are a bit lower than Ian Garry, although he hasn't been in the cage that long. He's been finishing all of his opponents here. But you look at it there, 4.39 for the significant strikes. That's lower than Ian Garry's at 4.72. Some other stats, 57% striking accuracy, striking defense 48%. So it's actually lower than Garry, so he does get hit a little bit. His takedown average is 0.44. His takedown accuracy is 100%, and his takedown defense is at 91%. But like I said, don't think we'll be seeing any takedowns in this fight. Let's go look at the betting odds on this one. So if we go look at Garry, you'll see here some books, FanDuel, Betway, they have Garry as a slight favorite here, but minus 138 on the books, Carlos Prates being the underdog. And Tapology, I found, well, obviously there hasn't been, there's only been 2 picks, and they're both for Ian Garry. So right now he's at 100%. Obviously this will change over the next little bit as, people give in their put their picks in for this fight, because again, it was just announced a few days ago, so don't really pay attention to the Tapology voting, but wanted to mention that anyways. Okay, so which way am I going in this fight? Well, I think it's going to be an interesting matchup. Certainly, I think it's definitely the biggest fight of Carlos Prates' career. But I think at the end of the day, you got to go with Ian Garry here, and I think Ian Garry is going to end up winning a decision. Now, hear me out. This is why I think Garry gets it done. 47% of Gary's wins come by decision. That's tied with 47% of his wins coming by knockout as well. He's gone the distance in his last 4 fights. I think that's kind of a key thing here. So you look at it there, Garry, 7 knockouts, 7 decisions, 1 submission win. And then his last 4 fights have all gone the distance. He, before that he was finishing a lot of his opponents, but against some of these higher level opponents, including a common opponent here, Neil Magny, they have all gone the distance in that one. I would argue that Garry has not finished a high level opponent. Is Carlos Prates a high level opponent? He might be. I would think that he's certainly got some devastating knockout power, but I don't know if Garry finishes him in this fight. To me, the only way that Carlos Prates would win this fight is if he knocks out Ian Garry. And I think it could happen. We have seen certain fights where Garry has been clipped. He got, for example, I know in that Keenan Song fight early on, he did get hit a little bit. But he's been doing a good job against guys that do have knockout power and keeping them at bay, in particular the Jeff Neal and Michael Venom Page fights. So I could see Garry kind of neutralizing that. But look, could Prates win by knockout? Absolutely. Will Carlos Prates win a decision here and outstrike Ian Garry over 5 rounds? I have a hard time seeing that for the simple fact that Carlos Prates has not gone 5 rounds in the UFC. All of his fights have ended in finish. So I think it's less likely that Prates wins the decision here. And if, and again, Gary's the king of going to the distances last couple fights, so I kind of favor it that way as well. Not to mention the fact that Ian Garry has never actually been finished in his career out of 17 fights. Those are some pretty good stats there. One thing we have to mention, and not a doctor, obviously, that's why I'm, breaking down fights here, but he smokes. He smokes a lot of cigarettes. That's got to affect the cardio to a certain degree. I don't know by how much. We'll see. But the longer this fight goes, you have to think that favors Garry, not only from the 5-round experience, but also just the fact that Gary's not smoking cigarettes. So that's got to catch up to him a little bit. And Garry has gone 5 rounds before, like we saw in his last fight. Garry also went 5 rounds in Cage Warriors as well, too, when he was the champion there. So that's something to consider. He does have that experience. And I mentioned the Shavkat fight. I wanted to bring that up because, that was, I thought, a good performance from Ian Garry, despite him losing that fight. So again, even though Gary's coming off his first career loss, still look good even in defeat. But I think at the end of the day, I think what's more likely is you're going to see Ian Garry win a decision here. Whether people like Garry or not, that's definitely fair. If people have their criticisms of him, he's a pretty good fighter, and he does find a way to win in a lot of cases, and he does end up getting it done. So I think in this case, he'll have a good game plan. He'll utilize, again, his, just good fight IQ and probably end up winning a decision here. So my official pick for this fight is going to be Ian Garry by decision to get it done on short notice against Carlos Prates. So I want to know what your prediction is in the comment section below. Which way you're leaning on this one? Let me know. We'll have a fun discussion about this fight. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. My name is James Lynch. Appreciate you tuning in. This is Early Look. This is a show where I take a little bit of an early look at some of the big upcoming fights and wanted to give you my preview and prediction for that. My name is James Lynch once again. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.